Some foods are excellent for long-term storage in your prepper pantry, like those. But some foods, not so much. In fact, they should have never made it into your prepper pantry, like these. Hello, my name is Les, and I want to welcome you to the Chef Prepper channel. Today we're going to look at the 5 worst foods that you could put into your prepper pantry for long-term survival that might cause a disaster during that coming MEGA SHTF event. Now, I know some of you may be wondering, how come those foods are on the good list and those foods are on the avoid list? Well, stick with me till the end and it'll all make sense. I know that some of you came to this video thinking that I was going to show you 5 specific, particular brand names of foods to avoid putting in your prepper pantry. But what I'm going to talk to you about is far more important than just 5 particular brand names of food not to put into your prepper pantry. By simply going through the video, this will all be self-explanatory. Now, let's look at those 5 foods that you should avoid putting into your prepper pantry and the reason why. Food number 5 that you should avoid putting in your prepper pantry be foods like these, those that require repackaging if you don't have the time or the equipment or the know-how to repackage them. For example, rice, oats of all types, pancake mixes, cake mixes, these type things, all-purpose flour. I can't give you more time to repackage them. I can't give you the equipment to repackage them, but I can share some tips and tricks on repackaging them. We do have several videos available if you need or want to learn how to repackage such foods. You can see those here, where we use all different types of equipment, containers, different sizes, oxygen absorbers, vacuum packing machines, vacuum sealing in jars, a whole number of ways that you can go about repackaging these foods for long-term storage. You can see all those, including how to repackage chocolate chips, potato chips, snack foods, and keep them on hand for years. I'm not saying don't have these in your prepper pantry. Just be sure, if you get these kind of foods, you have the time, the equipment, and the know-how to repackage them properly. And then they will no longer be on the avoid list. Food number 4 will only apply to some of you, but not all of you. Those of you that it won't apply to would be if you're prepping for a fairly large number of people. Otherwise, this might apply to you. And that is food number 4, foods like those that will require refrigeration after you open them. So you might need to avoid these kinds of foods unless you get package sizes, not like this one, but more so like this one, that will allow you to eat the entire contents whenever you open the can or open the package of food, or you've made preparations to provide your own grid-like power when the grid no longer functions. For those of you that might be considering a power station or preferably a solar generator, we do have several videos, again, where I have reviewed multiple sizes of power stations and manufacturers of power stations. So check those videos out if you think you might want to provide your own grid-like power, which amongst other things will allow you to keep a small refrigerator or perhaps a fully sized refrigerator going when the grid is no longer functioning. Food number 3 that you should avoid are foods that you find despicable, abhorrent, abominable, or you just simply don't like them for one reason or another. For example, foods that are or have genetically modified ingredients. Or bioengineered ingredients, same thing. Other things that might make you think of a food like I described: artificial or chemical food colorings, or artificial flavors. And for some folks, things like soybean oil, or canola oil, or peanut oil, or whatever type of oil. And from comments that some of you guys have made on some of the other videos, I know that some of you, rightfully so, don't like foods with lots of sodium. So if you find these foods despicable now, you'll find them despicable when the time comes. Don't get them. Put them in your prep or pantry, even if they're on sale or if they're very cheap, because you probably won't eat them anyway. So it would be better, even if you have to spend a little more money, to get food that you're going to eat. Food number 2 that you should avoid would be those foods that you are not prepared to properly cook, or you're not prepared to be able to properly prepare them to cook or bake. For example, dry beans. Dry beans take a long time to cook properly, take a lot of resources, including a lot of fuel. So if you're not prepared with lots of fuel on hand, you're going to need to be very fuel efficient, which means more than likely things like dry beans shouldn't be on your menu. So while alcohol stoves, sterno stoves, do-it-yourself stoves, and miniature stoves are all great for grid down in emergency situations, they're not the ideal type of stove for cooking things like dry beans. So if beans are on your menu, you might want to consider canned beans rather than the dry beans. And if beans are on your menu, then we have this video where we talk about the goods, the bads, the pros and cons of canned beans versus dry beans. If you have the right kind of stove and fuel, you can always use the pressure cooker to cook your beans, which will greatly reduce the time required to cook them. So a pressure cooker is available if you have the right stove and fuel, or you have a lot of firewood and will be using a lot of fires to do your cooking. An example of a food that you might not be able to properly process would be wheat berries, which seems to be the most popular prepper food to put into storage. If you don't have some kind of a crank or a hand-powered or people-powered grain grinder, you're going to have difficulty making flour from your wheat berries and making all your bread products. So if you're going to include dry beans in your storage foods, you're going to need a large amount of fuel and a proper stove to cook them on, or use a pressure cooker that will greatly reduce the amount of time you need to cook your beans. If you're going to include wheat berries in your storage foods, you're going to need a human-powered grain grinder, unless you make the investment into a solar generator or something similar that will then allow you to have your own supplied grid-like power. The number one food that you should avoid is any and every food that you and or your family just simply, for whatever reason, will not eat. Don't waste your storage space on foods that won't be used even in a crisis situation. So whatever the reason is that you won't eat those particular foods probably isn't going to change during that mega SHTF event that's coming. I know some of you guys are already saying when the time comes, you will gladly eat those foods. And you're right, we will, but why not go ahead and stock our prepper pantries with the foods that we do like so that we don't have to eat those foods. For example, if you don't like rice, don't buy a bunch of rice. Put it in Mylar bags, store it for years. Just simply buy the kind of food that you like, even if it costs a little bit more. Even though you might not have as many calories overall, you will still have food that you like and you will happily eat. So to summarize the 5 foods that you should avoid at all costs. Number 5 is foods that need to be repackaged for truly long-term storage if you don't have the time, the equipment, and the know-how to repackage it. The number 4 food to avoid are shelf-stable foods that will require refrigeration after you open them, unless you're prepared to provide your own grid-like power during those times. Number 3 on our list were foods that you find despicable. You just simply hate them. You're not going to eat them no matter what. Food number 2 were foods that you're not going to be prepared to properly cook and or properly prepare. Again, like the dry beans or the wheat berries, unless you got a grain grinder or for the beans you have a pressure cooker, or again, you are going to be able to provide your own grid-like power when the grid is no longer functioning. And food number one of the foods you should avoid are any and all foods that you don't like and you won't eat. And the last part of our summary, some of you are probably wondering what's the difference between food number 3 and food number 1. Food number 1 are foods that you don't like and you don't plan on eating. Food number 3 are foods that you hate and you just absolutely are not going to eat them. Food number 1 example for me would be celery. I don't like celery. I do eat it on occasion, but there are foods I find despicable. As of now, I don't think I will eat them. So that's the difference. Do you guys have foods that are on your avoid list at all cost? If you do, we would really like to hear what your no-go or don't get list includes. Today's video was about foods to avoid for one reason or another. We do have videos about foods to include in your prepper pantry, which even gives you specific brand names.